staff. Some of you have already seen me around this week. I'm a board member of CAATA, and I am your moderator slash facilitator for this session. And before we begin, I have been asked to let folks know that you can now, this is very exciting, you can now donate to CAATA on the CAATA website. Yes, and as a board member, they asked me to tell you to go to the About page, check it out, visit, think about how much you want to give now or today or next week or ongoing, and just support the work. Have you been having a good time? Yeah! All right, and know that it takes all of us to to build momentum and fundraise and make this happen. Again, we have an incredible volunteer-led board that does an amazing amount of work to make CAATA convenings happen and to bring artists in for these conversations. And so please do donate. And if you have any questions, Jeff is back there, your hottest honorary Asian, can tell you more about how to donate to CAATA after this session. Thank you. All right, so are you ready? Whoa, I'm dropping things in. Here we are at this session that has been titled, welcome, come on in, don't be shy. Centering Our Voices as a Revolutionary Act, and this is a panel of Middle Eastern / Western and Central Asian / MENA / all of these very complicated ways that we try to name ourselves in this community. And the challenge of naming might be one of the things that we talk about as we talk about identity. But this panel conversation builds on our last CAATA conference, which was held at Oregon Shakespeare Festival, in which we had a weekend pre-conference that really focused on what at that time was framed as West and Central Asian American artists. We also want to name that we want to be inclusive of our cousins in North Africa, because for our community, it's not necessarily geographically defined in that way. And that's one of the complexities that we will talk about as we open the conversation. But we are trying to, CAATA itself has always, from its inception, tried to create a very broad and inclusive understanding of what Asian American in the 21st century might mean, and give folks an opportunity to self-identify into this kind of coalition building, network building organization, which really started as a movement and became an organization. So we're here to partly talk about why are we here, why are we together, and how do we have this conversation. I also want to acknowledge that Heather Raffo just flew in this morning from New York, because concurrent to this CAATA convening has been a mix fest in New York focusing on Middle Eastern artists. And it's sad and wonderful that these conversations are happening in two locations at the same time. Mm-hmm. And so it's really wonderful to have Heather here to kind of bridge the conversations in two locations and fill us in on what's been happening. So I'll tell you a little bit about the structure of this. The panelists are going to introduce themselves in a moment briefly, and then we generated a whole bunch of questions among ourselves, more than we can probably get to in the amount of time that we have, of things that we think are juicy and we want to talk about together. And we're going to just make a space where you get to listen to us having this conversation and flowing between some prompts and questions. And then at the last 20 minutes or so, we'll open it up to take questions and comments. And I encourage us to not so much a Q&A, but really have a community dialogue. But we're going to ask you to listen for a little bit first. So with that, I'm going to pass to one of our co-hosts for the CAATA conference, Jamil, and from Silk Road Rising, to start off introductions. And very briefly, panelists, I'm going to ask you to just say who you are, where you're located, what your discipline is, how you identify, if you wish, and what else did we say? Yeah, I think that's pretty good. Jamil, you want to kick it off? Absolutely. Please say thank you to Jamil for being a co-host.
So Jamil Khoury, also a proud board member of CAATA.
Yes.
Founding artistic director of Silk Road Rising, co-founded with my husband, Malik Alani, right here. I am a producer, a playwright, and an essayist. I identify as mixed blood Arab American, or mixed blood Arab and Slavic American, and we can throw queer into that equation. He, him, his. And based in Chicago, and we are entering our 16th season as a company, and really excited about all the intersections that we're seeing playing out this week here at Confest, and looking to build on that.
Cool. Thanks. Who would like to go next? This way. Cool.
Ladies first.
Hi, I'm Toranjik Yazarian. I'm the founding artistic director of Golden Thread Productions in San Francisco. We're the first American theater company focused on the Middle East. I'm Iranian, Armenian, she, her, hers. Good?
Artistic practice?
My artistic practice is whatever is needed. Primarily a playwright, director, and increasingly a translator.
Yeah.
All right, so let's keep going this way.
My name is Novid Parsi. I'm a playwright. I live in Chicago. Identities, I'm Iranian-American, gay Iranian-American. My parents are Iranian. They were immigrants, and I was born here. Lived in various places in the States. I've lived in Chicago for about 15 years. I've worked both with these wonderful companies represented to my left. And this year, Silk Road Rising produced a play of mine, Through the Elevated Line, which was a beautiful production. And that's it for now.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Heather Raffo. I was born in Michigan and have lived in Brooklyn a bit longer than my time in Michigan. I have an Iraqi father and an American mother. I'm a playwright and an actress, and most often a mentor.
I'm Fouad Taymor. I'm Egyptian American playwright. I also sometimes will call myself Arab American, Muslim American, whatever, Middle Eastern. Mostly a playwright. I have done some other things. I've recently acted in a play by Jamil Khoury, which will be screened in January. My work has been, I've been affiliated with Chicago Dramatists, produced at 3CAATA Productions, had works at Silk Road, and also actively involved in the International Voices Project, which does work in translation festival, a yearly festival. I'm involved with the Arabic language programming. I've done some translation and direction for that. Anything else?
Did you say how you identify culturally? Or?
Culturally, yes.
Also, Fouad just flew in from Egypt.
Yes.
So, yeah, you might get the
Last night.
travel the farthest today. Yes. So glad you're here.
Thank you, and I feel privileged to be invited.
Also, I didn't do my other part of the introduction. So I identify as Arab American, and I am Lebanese American on my father's side, third generation, and white European American on my mother's side. I use she, her, or they, or non-gendered pronouns, and I'm also queer identified, and I live in Tampa, Florida. I'm the founding artistic director of Art to Action, Inc., which is based in Tampa and New York. So, I'm going to begin, and we're not going to go in any particular order, because I really do want it to be a conversation, with this question of why are we here at CAATA? What is it, like, how do we locate our various identities within a more broadly inclusive Asian American framework or conversation in the 21st century? And what are the benefits of being in that coalitional, broadly identified conversation, as well as, kind of when do we need to be specific about who we are and the specific things that our sometimes families or communities or theaters or artists are struggling with. So, so I'm just going to open that, and I'm going to merge 1 and 2 for the sake of time, and just acknowledge that, like the Latinx community, the Middle Eastern American community is vastly diverse in how we present racially, right? So some of us are very white passing, some of us are very dark skinned, some of us are readable as Middle Eastern, some of us are not. And so that creates this really, and legally and historically, we have been legally categorized as white, but that's not the lived experience that many of us have in the United States. So, so the question is kind of, how do we navigate these things around identity and how we identify ourselves and what it means to be here at the National Asian American Theater Conference and Festival? So anyone want to jump in with that? Yeah. Jamil?
Sure. So, my name is Jamil Khoury. I will introduce myself as Jamil Khoury, and people will hear Jimmy O'Corey. I don't have an ounce of Irish blood in me, but nevertheless. So I struggle with this question. I like to think I'm politically a person of color. Experientially, it's complicated because of how I look. And absolutely, I am the beneficiary of a great deal of white privilege, of white male privilege, and assumptions that people make about me on the street and so forth. Don't tell my story. So I have a really hard time relating to any number of categories, and I'm forever negotiating that.
Yeah, I get the same problem when I introduce myself, and now I try to introduce myself slowly, because when I say, hi, I'm Fuwate Moore, people tell me, how are you doing, Fuwate? They assume my last name is Moore. Yeah, and I'm thinking of starting a hashtag, I'm not a white male. Because I don't feel like it.
Anyone else want to?
I'll jump in. I mean, more than anything, my personal experience is that of an immigrant, and one that is, I don't know if misunderstood is the right word, but it's, there are many surprises in the U.S. When you come here as a teenager and you've sort of grown up in one country that's, I don't know, you sort of identify one way, and then you come here and then people put labels on you, and you have to sort of figure out why that is. And some of it is historically, I don't know, there's historical reasons, political reasons. But for me, it was really difficult, and in the beginning, I used to make fun of the whole, the census categories, because, Caucasian, I mean, so, for those of you who know, Armenia is on the Caucasus Mountains. So if anybody's Caucasian, it's me. Yeah. So I would say, well, so I must be Caucasian, but then, Caucasian is perceived in a certain way, and the more I was integrated into the American society, I then was treated in a certain way, and there were many assumptions about, once people learned that I was born in Iran, there were many assumptions about Iranian women, many assumptions about my religious practices. I grew up Muslim and Christian, and I don't have a problem with either religion. And there are just all these assumptions, kind of, you carry them as a burden in a way, and that burden becomes heavier and heavier as you become older and you interact with more people in multiple fields. And by the time I started working in theater, this sort of politics of representation and identity were at the core of my work, because I wasn't seeing, my stories on stage. stage, and I wasn't seeing representations of the kind of woman I am and the kind of family that I grew up in. And so that it's an ongoing daily struggle, I would say, to I don't know, reduce one's identity to a checkbox. And it's a disservice, I would say, to all of us. I understand it has administrative and political uses, but, you know.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll say that something that's on my mind lately is that we have a very unique experience being American dealing with this, but I think the Middle East is very much dealing with it as well. My perspective is hugely influenced by war. Being Iraqi American, I can't get away from that part of my upbringing, because at 20 there was the first war, and then there was the second war, and there was 13 years of sanctions in between, and how many years of occupation. So it's like my relationship to being Middle Eastern is hugely influenced by constantly having to bridge two cultures for the sake of kind of keeping them alive and together and talking to each other and not seeing each other as enemy. So that I can't get away from that when I think about identity and polarizing my identity, or saying, what am I? Because it's been, since birth, I've been navigating two parents of two very different places and then communicating that to anyone else in my community. But I'm also in pursuit of this because Iraq itself was arguably one of the first melting pots, as many of these cultures are. I mean, it was a place where so many people came through, and many Iraqis will say that they felt quite one with their nationality and their brethren and sisterin, and now it's in quite a crisis. So the way we're being pulled and torn here is something that I'm seeing happening to a country where people will say they don't even feel Iraqi anymore. And I think it's just an interesting way that our conversation here in America is reflecting in the Middle East in general. And that takes me to another thing that's been on my mind, is because internally to our community, as we talk about majority religions and minority religions and color of skin and all these different country of origin and the different ways that plays out, I feel that, I'll get back to that. I feel like I'm taking it down a different road, but anyway, okay, I can go. Is that I think that, and on the one hand, it feels like we're talking identity so much and it's pulling us apart not in a bad way, in a discussion way. And then I keep thinking, gosh, the Middle East is in the middle. I know it's a problematic term, Middle East, but it's still in the middle. So maybe our community is actually one of those bridge communities in and of itself. And the way we start to create work with our African neighbors and our Asian neighbors and our European neighbors might really be something at the crux of the dialogue itself. So that's my latest bee in my bonnet is, isn't it kind of cool that some of us do pass, and that some of us can navigate three different communities, absolutely, right? Because maybe we're gonna be a bridge builder in how we create the art that is gonna cross dialogue.
Yeah, so my experience of identity resonates with and echoes everyone else's, what everyone is saying here. The idea of name, how your name is read. Every time someone hears my name or sees my name, no Farsi, there's that question, where are you from? I don't know how many times I've answered this question, how many different ways I've had this conversation. Where are you from? When my husband and I were first dating 12 years ago, he's a white American. I said, watch, this person coming up to us is going to hear my name. And here's how this conversation is going to go. how do you spell that? What is it? Where are you from? And I'm going to say I'm from Texas. Because I know what they're asking, and I don't want to give it to them. So I'm going to say, I'm from Texas. And where are you from? Like, well, I was born in New York, but, you know. And so it just, and then finally, my parents are from Iran. And it's just that, expectation, that demand, that you have to tell your story at all times. And with that is that assumption that you are not from here. You are not of us. Even though I'm as American, I'm more American than Iranian in so many ways. But it's more complicated than that as well. And part of it is also skin color and the way that Middle Eastern people, Middle Eastern descent, can be read as various things. And if it's summer and I'm a little darker, I'm read a different way than if it's Chicago winter and I'm lighter. And then part of that also, and related to those two things, is how other people define you, and whether those other people are individuals or the state or documents like the census. For early in my life, I would check white because I was told Middle Eastern is white, even though I felt the violence of being erased in that way. And then I would check other, and other just didn't seem like it fit either, and I just wish there was like an ish box. It's interesting, it's complicated, and it's this is how I negotiated and navigated in my personal life, but then that also informs the art and the writing. That's always the question: with every play, do I represent Iranian Americans? What other ethnicities do I represent? Is there that expectation that I have to write Iranian characters because I'm Iranian American, even though I've never been to Iran? I don't speak Farsi. So anyway, we can go down that path as well, if you'd like.
I want to also offer my perspective on this. I identify as a person of color. I was raised by the white side of my family because my father and mother split up very young, but my father was quite noticeably darker than I am. And in some way, whatever people think Arab looking is, my sister is more Arab looking than I am. I'm often read as Latino or all kinds of things. But I recently found, I want to share this because I find it a fascinating history. How did Middle Easterners come to be categorized as white on the census? There was actually I had to do research for this for an anti-racism training recently. And there was an actual legal battle that went all the way to the Supreme Court. That was a Syrian man who arrived to the U.S. during segregation and wanted to be categorized as white. And you can understand the stakes of that, right, in that particular historical moment. And at that time, these categories, the categories are renamed and changed like throughout U.S. history in these really, really disturbing ways. And at that time, the category was Asiatic or Mongoloid. That was the actual category, right? And so this guy won this case. This blows my mind. This guy won this case at the Supreme Court by saying, if I am a Mongoloid, so was Jesus, because I come from the same land. The Supreme Court freaked out and were like, oh my gosh, we can't call Jesus a Mongoloid. And they let him be white. Right? Like, you can't make this shit up. And we're still living with the legacy of these things, right? And so when I came onto the board of CAATA, the way that I think about it is also that, like, recognizing that this is an extremely American conversation, right, around race and identity and category. And this whole notion of Asian American is actually a construct, a political construct, in response to U.S. imperialism and military intervention in Asia, right? So the experience that we are living is the formation of an identity in response to American imperialism and military intervention in West and Central Asia, right? So for me, that is the reason, if we acknowledge that all of this is constructed anyway, that is the reason for us to be in the room together. That's my personal answer.
I
Yeah.
wanted to add something. So at Golden Thread, we do audience surveys that have demographic questions. We've been doing it, it's the same survey that you guys do. We've been doing it for 5 years, and we knew from the beginning that this question of do people self-identify as Middle Eastern is a big question, because we wanted to sort of track how people's feelings towards that umbrella identity changes over time, because in a way, Middle Eastern American is a term that we began using, and I don't know that it necessarily existed in sort of representation conversations before that. So we wanted to see if people self-identify as Middle Eastern, and then we knew that many may not, and we wanted to see what the breakdown of identity is. So we listed all the countries that we consider to be included in the umbrella, including Armenia, Afghanistan, Egypt, Libya. So all of, it's a long list of 25 countries. We included languages. What languages other than English do you speak at home? And religion. Do you identify as any of these religions? And we mainly included the Muslim, Christian, Jewish, and Zoroastrian. And what's interesting is that now looking at 5 years of data, that of the people who don't self-identify as Middle Eastern, many of them, I think it's actually about 12 or 18% of them, identify with one of the specific countries that we consider to be in the Middle East. And many of them may not identify with a country or self-identify as Middle Eastern, but they speak the language at home. So these sort of personal ways that we each connect with our identity is very complicated, and I don't, it's just really interesting to track it over time and track it from production to production. So depending on who's in the audience, it's a really interesting study.
I want to say something about the legal battles that were fought like 100 plus years ago. Today, this is taking a somewhat different tone with regards to the 2020 census. Now, there had been such a strong push to include a MENA category in the census, and that was really seen as a victory on the part of activists from within our communities. My understanding is that under the current administration, it's being taken off the census. It will not appear as a category in 2020. However, a lot of people are now saying, we don't want to check that category under the Trump administration. Does this become tied to a national security discourse of some sort? So it's really, once again, shifting, the contours of that conversation. Who we are legally.
So, and the stakes of that on the one hand are about how do we have political power if we're not counted, and on the other hand, what happens if we're counted under a regressive government. Nobody brought up the issue of representation in our work and what stories we get to write or tell, and it's interesting that there is this kind of thing, like by virtue of being quote-unquote Middle Eastern, almost all of us are culturally or ethnically or racially mixed, actually, in fact. If you look at Lebanon, it's like centuries of conquest after conquest after conquest. What it is to be Lebanese is not at all clear in any kind of racial DNA kind of way, right? And yet we are, on American stages, faced with these questions of representation that I think we've kind of been talking about throughout the week in various ways here at CAATA, and then there are some things that are specific that we have to deal with. So I don't know if anyone wants to say anything further on that, or roll into the next question, or what you feel is important to say about what is important about representation when we're making our work or producing it. Yeah.
I think we should recognize the voice, because we're represented by different categories of voices. Some of us are American-born, ethnically connected. Some of us are expats. And there's also the other category of theater and translation, which I love because it brings a perspective that is pure from the Middle East into theaters in the U.S., but it has to be categorized as such because that should not override our voice here because we bring a different perspective. Especially the expat category, the problem is that when I go and talk back in Egypt, people tell me, you don't have the right to criticize because you don't live here anymore, right? And I tell them, no, I'm following everything and I want things to be good here so I can speak. And then when I speak here, well, you're not fully American, you're naturalized. So that category of the expat voice is the one that I would like to see expand a little more and reach audiences. Because we have something to say.
Yes, they do.
I mean, it's such a large and tricky landmine of a question and topic, representation and ethnicity and identity. I mean, as Heather said, we are so focused on identity so much, it seems, at this cultural moment. And I've lived long enough where I can see these moments come and go. And it does seem that it's partly because we're living in a regressive, reactive government that also is focusing so much on identity, and I understand the progressive response, which I also share, is then to also focus on identity, but a different way, from a different angle, with different values, but still focus on identity. And for me, that's not usually the starting point as a writer when I'm thinking about plays. I'm not discounting that it is for many people. I'm not discounting the value of that. I'm just saying it's not universal, and it isn't for me. I don't start by saying, as an Iranian-American playwright, what kind of Iranian-American play am I going to write? It's more which I think a lot of writers work this way, what interests me? You know, having to learn to pay attention to what grabs your attention, what grabs your imagination, seizes your imagination, that process that every writer does, which may or may not include identity and ethnicity, or may include it in various ways that aren't a simple one-to-one, I'm a Middle Eastern playwright, so I write Middle Easternly, whatever that may be. But, you know, it also means that when I do write, as I have plays that don't feature named ethnicities, that conversation we were just having about still being perceived through that lens, viewed through that lens, still applies to the work. So I wrote a play recently that was given a stage reading where ethnicity was not at play. You know, there was a casting note, please cast diversely, but that was it. And the main character had a kind of different sounding name, but the producer assumed because of me and my name and my background that I wanted that person to be cast in that way, in that kind of mean a way. And I really didn't. You know, once I explained that to him, he was totally on board and fine with it, and it was a lovely staged reading. But just that assumption that and a director of that same reading said to me, people see your name and they are always going to assume that you are writing that way, even when you're not. Which is kind of, you know, just how it is.
Just looking at it from like an artistic producer, artistic director perspective, you know, I think it's very common, we see it in our playwrights, in our community, that people feel a burden of representation. People feel the responsibility. I must tell the story of my people, and I must share like the full history of 4,000 years of Egyptian history or Phoenician history, or and so I think that is very alive in our community. But more and more at Golden Thread, what we encourage people to do is to write, the story that feels urgent and real to them, and go at it from a very personal, artistic, like follow their personal artistic path, and more often than not, the end result has elements of their culture. and that I think is organic and is true to them. But I think this idea of, especially because of what's going on politically, I think we all feel like we must correct, you know, the zeitgeist out there, and it's a heavy burden. And you know, I encourage playwrights in our community to sort of tune that out when they can.
And that corrective, you know, sort of interventionist impulse, I mean, it comes from such a defensive place. Tragically, I have this very distinct memory of being 12 years old, so I think it was 1977, and thinking to myself that I am associated with two categories, two communities, Arab and gay, who everyone hates. Like, no one around me in any context had anything good to say about either of those identities. So I did have this very keen sense that we have to somehow correct that through narrative, through stories. I probably didn't use that language in my head, but that was the sense. And so it was that reaction to something very sad, very tragic.
Yeah, and the need to then explain the whole history. I remember that we have a few years ago, we produced a play that was about two women caught in the middle of the Iran-Iraq war. And in their dialogue, there was all this exposition sort of explaining the history and the border and the geography. And I'm like, this, you don't really need this. And she would say, you know, the playwright would say, but people don't know where these countries are, or what their relationship is, or when the war happened, or how it was. And, you know, we took a lot of it out. Because the story stood for itself. Like, it didn't need all of that.
That pedagogical instinct.
Yeah, the teaching and the...
And I agree with all that is being said, that especially when Ovid says, we don't start out planning to do this. You do what you're interested in and you're doing. But at the end, it's the voice that comes through. And our voices are colored by our own experiences. So I can write a story about nothing that has ethnic correction, but when you read it, there are these hints of something that are always in there. I didn't say that. I'm also a chemical engineering professor, so everything I write has a little bit of some shade of science or engineering in it, because that's what I know, these are my experiences. Yeah. And the more we allow ourselves to be comfortable and act naturally, the more this will come out, that the voice of that community that is not heard.
I'm going to give Heather a chance to respond to this question if you wish, and then I'm going to throw us into another one.
That's
Do
okay.
you want to say anything? You're good. Yes, if you all want, we can continue that piece. But I want to get to this. So we posed questions to each other by email prior to getting together, and some of us just met today for the first time. And this one really, everyone wanted to address. That, how is a Central or West Asian or Middle Eastern or MENA, choose your term, how is our theater movement revolutionary, given the title of this panel? How does our work both challenge our own communities and mainstream audiences? And I just want to say, as we dive into this, I just want to remind us that for our community, revolution is not a metaphor. We have very, very transnational communities. Some of us have families that are living through war or revolution as we speak. And it's important to think about what does revolutionary mean in a U.S. context, and also please know it's not a metaphor for us. Yeah. So what does that mean for us to build a cultural movement, a theater movement together? Does anybody want to address that?
I think Heather should speak.
Wow, God. I mean, I had 100 family members in Iraq at the start of the Second War, and I now have 2. So the refugee crisis is real. They're scattered all around the globe. Some are waiting to get places. Some are stuck in different countries, you know? And so it's, you're right, Andrea, everything feels revolutionary. mean, when I wrote Nine Parts of Desire, it was the first Iraqi female protagonist in the English language. And so I think every act our community does is pretty much revolutionary. I think any one of us writing and getting up on stage in these critical times is revolutionary. It just is, and it continues to be over and over again. These are dialogues that are, have to be had, and we're perfectly placed to have them. We have the history, to allow us to bridge these conversations. So, yeah, I think it's also a fairly new community, as in the last couple decades, right? I mean, as a gathering force theater community, it's fairly new, and I think that's also really exciting. I think the thing I'm thinking about most is the multiplicity of our voices and how that can have a bigger impact on the American theater. So Taraj and Jamil naturally do this because their whole season can show an audience how diverse the voices are. Outside of theaters like theirs, there's maybe one slot for a Middle Eastern artist every 5 seasons, maybe at best, right? So, and then the pressure on that one play, that one playwright, that director, whatever, to be like, we have spoken to this national, if not global, right, crisis that's going on. And then, this is maybe harkening back to the last question, but how many of our plays get picked up or don't get picked up based on what we're writing about, right? So I think that I'm really thinking about how there can be more things side by side so that everybody's involved in a broader conversation and not just pigeonholed into whatever conversation one artistic director thinks might be valid.
I want to speak to a particular revolutionary act. So at Silk Road, we showcase playwrights of East Asian, South Asian, and Middle Eastern, West Asian backgrounds. We've often said we've made a special commitment to Muslim voices and to combating Islamophobia through storytelling and in a very humanized, so not Muslim angels or Muslim demons, but Muslim human beings. And I'm not saying this in a self-congratulatory way about our company, but it is the act that I am probably most proud of because it's the act that we get the most pushback for. So I just want to put that out there. And also there were many years when we could not get funded for anything that had the word Muslim in it. That was sort of like the kiss of death. No one wanted to touch for any number of reasons. There was just too much fear, too much anxiety, too much, concern. So I think naming, because most of us probably come from a somewhat secular place, and it's been very important for us to specifically name Muslim experiences within this repertoire.
Well, the Patriot Act actually forced foundations to make sure that whatever money they're giving is not going to, Muslim organizations or which
Arts
are
included.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, which are
Yes.
we're assumed to be supporting, arts and religion.
Yes, actually,
religious
and
centers.
some of our grant, this is important noting it. Some grant contracts, for example, have a clause that say you cannot use the money to support any artist who calls for the end of a state, which is code for let's not talk about Palestine, right? So yeah, we have to, as producers and presenters and fundraisers, we have to navigate this stuff.
I want to sort of go at the question from a different angle. So when we started Golden Thread Productions, you know, there was a lot of questions about, is this going to be an Iranian company? Is this going to be Iranian Arab company? Like, how are we going to define our mission, and who is our community? And you know, so about 3 years we had those conversations, and we sort of landed on Middle Eastern American theater, mainly inspired by Asian American and Latino American and African American theater experience. I mean, without those histories and all that had been accomplished by those communities, I probably would not have gone in the direction that I did, and sort of the mission, the way it was defined at Golden Thread would have been, you know, possibly very different. But this idea that despite and maybe because of the multiplicity of experiences and voices that are in our broad community, that we are stronger because of them. We are stronger when Arabs and Iranians and North Africans and Armenians and Turks and Kurds come together and sort of build a coalition that doesn't take away our individual voices, but says together we are more powerful and we are louder and we can take more space. And I think that is a credit to, you know, Asian American theater that in many ways also includes nations that were at war together, that have invaded each other, yet the communities here in the US come together and collaborate in a way that they probably can't do in the home country, which is also the case in the Middle East. At Golden Thread, we bring, you know, artists from communities that have historic animosity or currently are at war, and nowhere other than the US, I would say, they can actually come together. So it's an incredible opportunity we have to do a kind of collaboration that is not possible elsewhere.
And when we think of Turks and Kurds and Armenians and Arabs, Persians, Assyrians, Berbers, we're told we're not supposed to like each other, either for historical reasons, political, and that has been so, I would say, successfully rejected and refuted within the Middle Eastern, the MENA theater community, and I think that's just hugely exciting. And the experience of watching Turkish American artists watch a play about the Armenian genocide, which their government tells them did not happen, and them agreeing and acknowledging and feeling and expressing empathy is, you know, it was very powerful. It's revolutionary. Absolutely.
Following up on what Jamil was talking about you know, Islamophobia and responding to things, sometimes playwrights will naturally veer towards one of the two extremes. Angels and demons that he's talking about. Either be very defensive and say, no, everything is great and whatever, or, you know, no, we're really horrible and we're showing it up here and that's what you want to see. But what is really revolutionary is to actually come to the center and have a capacity at self-reform, at showing that, you know, these are human beings, they have the same experiences, exactly the same experiences as everybody else in here, and we're not afraid of talking about things and pointing them out. Especially in the Muslim discourse, there is always a fear of talking about any specific topics because of backlash. And no, this is how it is, it should be. But everything should be open for discussion. We should be able to go after things and talk about them. And just to give a quick example, I addressed the issue of polygamy in one of my plays. And maybe people say, well, is that very important? It is because of how it affects the lives of people. And when you put it on stage and you say, here, discuss and see if there is something that can come out of that without being attacking my own community, but with like, let's put things out there and discuss them. That's how things get revolutionized.
I want to say that in my own work, I've experienced like that thing about we're told we're not supposed to like each other, by being queer identified, and as a Lebanese American, I was raised Catholic, not Muslim, and I was very much taught that I should somehow be afraid. Like there's this, Muslims and queer people aren't supposed to like each other. So, but I have experienced more fierce solidarity and support from Muslim women than like anybody, right? In terms of like having the courage to have these inter-community conversations. And what does it mean to stand for each other? And what does it mean for me as a queer, Catholic-raised Arab American to fight Islamophobia? Because it affects all of our community, because anti-Arab or anti-Middle Eastern prejudice and racism is intimately bound with Islamophobia in the United States, right? So we're all affected by the way that these multiple forms of oppression work. And what is revolutionary is when, to me, was when we work together. Did you want to say something? Okay. So this can continue. We're moving toward like opening it up pretty soon, but I think right before we do that, I want to say that we had this other question we wanted to tackle. It's kind of two questions that I'll roll into one around how can we do better at reflecting and supporting the diversity within our communities and building solidarities in the intra-cultural work, and then also in the across identity. How can the Middle Eastern American artists more fully be a part of this broader Asian American movement, or movements happening by theaters of color and artists of color who are working on coalition building. So I'm going to put that question to the panel, and then from there we're going to just have a dialogue. Yeah. Anybody want to say anything about that?
Well, I mean, I don't have the answer, but my thought is that with this laudable goal of building coalitions in arts worlds and other worlds that we live in, I think a lot of that is being able to, having the artistic license to not just write our own stories. I think that there is a real impetus now to feel like we have to tell versions of our own stories. It gets back to this focus on identity that we were talking about. And as several people this week have said, that kind of, in some way, that's part of the theatrical enterprise, but it's one small part of the theatrical enterprise, which is really about creating empathy with people not like us. And being able to feel like you can't tell someone else's story because they're not like you, and then how did you find not like you? Is that identity? Is that gender? Is that, if I can only write gay Iranian men, then that's a very limited theatrical oeuvre.
Monologues.
Right. And that's my concern with this kind of focus now on the authenticity of our experiences, which is not to be dismissed. It's also not the totality of our experiences, and certainly not the totality of our artistic imaginations. And I just say that because it's allowing for that, I think, then builds towards this greater cohesion that I think we all want.
I'll jump in, and this is a conversation Andrea and I have had, but I'm really in pursuit of something that's not empathy and is value oriented, because I feel like I feel like the last 2 decades of my theater work were so concentrated on empathy and did a really good job at it, right? I got somewhere with it. We've all got somewhere with it. It is super duper, yes, but right, super duper. But then it's not enough. It's not quite right. So that sense of we're all telling our own stories, right? We're all telling our own community stories, challenging our own communities and others, and creating empathy, like profound empathy for people, finally understanding people from the Middle East, or feeling they're humanized. It's just not enough. It's just, yeah. Well, enough. I think value is very different than empathy. Back to this idea of yes, one Middle Eastern slot every 5 years, but also that's in competition with the one Asian slot, with the one Latin slot, with the one, and then we're all in competition. Like, not that we're in competition with each other right now. I'm just saying that ish, right? Like, it's not, it's, in getting a really empathetic play, an empathetic story, we get to feel sorry for those people. And then they're those people. And they stay over there as those people. And I'm like, no, value is what you want. I'll write a play about whatever the F I want to write the play about, and they're going to put it on stage because it's a good play. And it's next to the other good play, and we're in the same season together, and we're pushing up against back to the multiplicity of voices, like within the Middle Eastern community, wouldn't it be, when those dialogues start happening, well, then it's way better if we're in dialogue and our plays are pushing up against each other in the same season. And we're naturally crossing over audiences going, aha, yeah, right, then it's value. And other people are just watching the good plays for the value of the stories, not the representation of that play from that community that had to say the hard thing of that tragedy that's going on in the world right now. So I don't know. I just feel like my brain's exploding with the empathy thing. Only for having pursued it for so long and knowing it's good. No, I'm not negating. It is so needed. It is what theater does great. But I'm in pursuit of something, and I don't have an answer.
One of the things that Jamil and I have been talking about, and I think in our community in San Francisco Bay Area we talk about a lot, is sort of centering our narratives. Like, enough defining ourselves in relation to some perceived white center, right?
Yeah.
So adapting plays from each other's communities, writing characters from each other's communities in our plays, not assuming when ethnicity is not defined, when ethnicity of a character is not specified in a play, let's not assume that goes to a white actor. Could be any kind of actor. So those are like practices that we've made like our practice at Golden Thread, and we encourage our playwrights to also we've never, in our mission is, if you're a playwright of Middle Eastern descent, you can write about any topic. So we've never, maybe because I'm a playwright, I've never wanted to box myself into being forced to always write about my experience or my community. So really encouraging our artists to whether it's through co-productions, which we've had a number of co-productions with Asian American theater, with African American Shakespeare, really build concrete collaboration relationships with other communities through the work, relationships that's based on the artistic exploration.
And that historically there always have been relationships between Asians and Africans, between Asians and Arabs, and this is, this is a pre-colonial, pre-European imperialist.
And Iranians.
And Iranians. I just want to say, it's a very short space. I mean, between empathy and pity. And I think as theater makers, all of us in this room are in a negotiation all the time with white liberalism. And white liberalism loves its victims. And, so the fact, I'm sorry.
Please don't apologize.
The fact that, we refuse also a victim status, that this isn't about being downtrodden and miserable and so forth, has also been a big challenge for, what type of work people want to sanction.
Yep.
Fuad, did you want to offer anything, or should I just open it up?
Just very quickly, there are a couple of things that I like to hear is when an audience says, "I've never seen anything like this before," or they say, "Oh, I didn't know that about you." So I don't know if that's empathy or not, but Naveed mentioned the word universality, and that's what we're all going for, is to feel that, oh yeah, I mean, that sounds exactly like my story in that community.
Great, thank you. So now we just want to open the floor to what's percolating with you after hearing this conversation. And also, a question that I didn't ask that maybe is a question for the room is like, what feels urgent? And are the work before us, we're getting to the end of this conference, what feels urgent as we move out from here? Go ahead.
Sorry, that was I raised my hand too
Yeah.
early, but I'm inspired. So one, thank you all so much for doing this and taking space here and sharing it with us. That in itself, as we're speaking, is part of the change making. First off, my name is Michael Rosegren, and I am a theater student in undergrad at Boston University. So I identify as Hapa. My mother is from Luzon, the archipelago of Mayi, which through colonization has been deemed as the Philippines. And my father is a white European American. I just wanted to share that. So what I'm sort of like hearing and what is on my mind is that there's sort of this like juxtaposition. This was sort of started at the start of the conversation between like a desire for a label and terminology and nomenclature that fits ourselves because we like to, or I like to proclaim a certain identity because culture matters so much to me and is such an important part of my life that I like to be able to say something to someone to try and start to explain where I'm coming from, what my life has been about. But that's contrasted with like a longing for the labels to not define our lived experience, because how can any one word, especially an English colonial word, explain my lived experience of being in this body for all these years and being in the world that we're in? Like, how can anything really describe that or try to sum it up, right? So in this conference, we've been talking about like language revitalization, the importance of oral history in communicating stories, and sort of that role and that we play as theater makers. And one of my friends from university who lives in Chicago, her name's Irion, she says, if you can say it, it's a word. And I really like this because to me that gives us the opportunity, and I'm sort of wondering if this interests any of you, like for us to start creating our own words. Because if we felt that America as it exists today and English as it exists today hasn't provided us with the words we want to express how we're feeling, how we are as human beings, like should we be developing our own nomenclature to take back who we are from the people who have tried to label us? And like how can coining terms and making that known through our art, through program notes, through whatever mediums we want, how can the creation of our own language and dialogue be used going forward? That, to me, sort of responding to that question, is kind of urgent.
Thank you. Anyone want to respond to that?
Well, just because it's, in my gut, I hate the term Middle East.
Yeah.
And the fact that we say golden thread, Middle East center stage, like every time I see that, I'm stabbing myself. But, so having said that, there's a very practical aspect to it, right? So back in the late 90s, we didn't feel that we had the power or the voice to sort of fight that battle, the battle of language. We tested Near Eastern, or Middle East, North Africa, or SWANA is an acronym that's popular in the Bay Area, Southwest Asian, North African. So we tested a few of these, but people didn't all recognize what you were referring to. Whereas when we said Middle Eastern, most people had a general understanding of what we were talking about. Even within that term, Golden Thread's definition of the Middle East is very broad and inclusive, which we always have to educate people on. But my hope is that we will continue to use that term until it becomes obsolete, and until brilliant minds have come up with a term that is both realistic and recognizable. And I would love to endorse that term when you come up with it.
Okay, there's a couple responses and then we'll go Jeff.
So I'm hearing Michael telling us that you guys are saying we want to develop a cultural identity, but don't you dare label us. So it's a double-edged sword, and it reminds me of the conversation about affirmative action. When you discuss affirmative action, on one end, yes, it's needed because it's correcting something that has been happening, but at the same time, it is an acknowledgement that there is a racial problem that has not been resolved. So it's never an easy debate. It's never an easy thing. And when we are in transition, that's what happens. So we need to keep pushing and want our own identity, but at the same time resist people using it to isolate us.
And I just want to add, there were, in the first years of Silk Road, I tried really hard with the term Southwest Asian, and I just kept repeating it to people, and they would respond, so you do theater from the Philippines and Thailand. I mean, that's what they would hear, and well, yes, but not in the Southwest Asian context. So I just sort of give up, you know?
Right, and the problem with all of this, of course, is it assumes like ancient Greece and Rome are the center from which everything else is defined as West or East, right? And so if we're trying to, and Africa isn't even on the map, so yeah. So I mean, really, that's where this language comes from. And then, you know, so I also want to lift up like another thing that connects us is the colonial history and the responsive theory of Orientalism, right? Which was penned by Edward Said, who was a Palestinian, right? And so in all that whole European colonial period, it was all the Orient, and it's a specific U.S. political agenda that has created Middle Eastern exceptionalism and created this term that we're all like, ugh, but I gotta use it because nobody else knows. Right? So I just wanted to acknowledge that. I think these questions around language are really important because they carry these entire political histories. So I saw Jonathan, and now there's one. Okay, these two first.
It's interesting what you said about the census. In the UK, the Arab community finally got onto the census in the last time round. And so, you know, because in the UK, the census decides where resources are allocated with our local government. The Chinese went into Asian last time, and then our community centres, etc., shut because Asian has been, in the UK, taken on by South Asians. And if money goes to there, they will often, it's not redistributed, you know, in Asian, as we know, West Asia through to Southeast Asia. So I guess I'm wondering, is it similar in the States that you have, you know, using these labels, you know, can or cannot access funds? It sounds like it's different. And I guess the other thing is about, yeah, you know, I certainly relate to, you know, I was taught to hate Japanese, and then I went to live in Japan for a while because my family from Hong Kong. And you know, and again, I used to run Yellow Earth Theatre years ago, which is again mixing all these companies that used to be at war with each other. But I found moving forward, you know, let's find different touch points. So I'm currently with a group of artists producing the first Black and Asian Opera Festival in the UK. It's happening now as we speak, and we've got some Armenian, Nigerian, etc., etc. But it's our love of music that we talk about, and you know, those kind of things. So wondering if there's sort of like, there's a political identity, but surely is there a way to bring the art into the centre of this? So yeah, so segmentation and bringing the art into this.
Really quick on that, music is so important because this kind of segmentation doesn't happen in the music and literary fields. It happens in theater because our bodies are racialized. Right? When you're in the music field, it's very clear the relationship between musical forms, right? It's just so apparent. It doesn't even need to be a discussion. And also in poetry, in the literary community, there's this much more easy inclusion. And it's something about theater that has racialized all of us on American stages that makes these separations happen. I don't know if anybody else wanted to respond to that, and then we'll go over here.
I was just going to
imperfect term, but a necessity and a bonding point to bring community together because of discrimination and the need for it to bring us into the room together and to have a political face. And I so appreciated the comment about how theater makers of ethnicity that we can bond with other communities of ethnicity, and how important that is, that we don't segment ourselves, but that we come together and to represent other groups within our work as directors or playwrights or producers. That because the United States has all of us in it. Let's put ourselves up on stage in all our richness.
Thank you. Okay, hold your hands up high so I can see it. And we'll just go boom, 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 boom. And we might be done. So let's keep it rolling.
Just as a contextualizing thing, I offer, and I've said this in some other settings, that when we look at the composition of the world, people of color are 80% of the global majority.
Yes.
And we know that things have changed already in many cities in this country, so I offer, there's a good friend of mine who keeps pushing me to say, rather than person of color, people of the global majority. Because I think there is a sense of solidarity and empowerment, and language matters, and it really shifts the gaze and the centralizing of whiteness.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for this discussion. I'll identify myself. I'm Danny. I use he, him, his, and my background is Turkish, Sephardic, Ashkenazi, Eastern European Jewish, and Cuban. I've been thinking so much about how the establishment of nation states is such a factor in the complexity of these individual and coalitional identities, and that we take that concept as such common sense. And the way that, a nation state both kind of smushes people together into a synthetic identity that maybe didn't exist before, and then also creates subdivisions that maybe didn't exist before. And, so my family coming from Istanbul, part of my family, I've always sort of, I never identified as Turkish until I came to the Middle Eastern America convening at the LARC, and suddenly I mentioned that I was Turkish Sephardic, and then all the Turks in the room were like, hey! And I'm like, what? But it's like, well, my family wasn't from Turkey. There was no Turkey. We were from Istanbul in the context of the Ottoman Empire, and ethnicity functions very differently in that kind of an empire than it does in a nation state, which says everyone has to be Turkish now, and and when in fact Turks have Kurdish and Armenian and all the different sorts of backgrounds that get flattened, and then that creates a lot of stress in my head based on these historical events that I wasn't even around for. Whereas conversely, the other example I think of is in Palestine and Israel. You can't, maybe this is changing a little now, but it doesn't make sense to people if you say Arab Jew. Like it's a oxymoron, And I had conversations there with people where you have to say Mizrahi, which literally means Eastern, and that's the term for the majority of Israelis who have at least some Arab background. But if you say Arab Jew, even though it's equivalent to saying Arab Christian or Arab Muslims, it doesn't even make any sense. But pre-State of Israel, people identified as Arab, and Jews, Muslims, Christians, whatever, there were tensions, but it wasn't this thing that didn't exist. Suddenly this person isn't real anymore. And so I'm just thinking about how not that necessarily there's a new language that will suddenly make sense after all this history of colonization, we can't get rid of that. But in thinking about at least how do we conceptualize, even if it's complicated and it still takes an hour to explain, we need to go back and sort of look at the history of how constructs were imposed, and even in our reactions to those concepts, how are we still bringing those concepts with us that don't actually make sense in our contemporary being, especially in diaspora. anyway, yeah, so that's been on my mind, that deconstructing the history in that kind of detail has so much to do with how we think of ourselves moving forward.
Thank you. I'm going to take the people who had their hands up and then come back to the panel, so just take notes. Who is next? Yeah.
Hey guys, I'm Patty. Thank you all for being here very much. Let's see, first of all, I want to float it out there just for all of us attendees. I'm so grateful to be here that I'm not sure if you all know, but there was an Israeli, I believe, Air Force strike of a massive 5-story theater complex in Jerusalem.
Gaza.
Gaza, excuse me, thank you. Thank you. And I don't know, I just want to float it out there and find a way that, I don't know, perhaps we can respond in our various groups or as CAATA as a whole to because there's a massive outcry from the National Theatre in the UK, and Carol Churchill and many artists have spoken to that bombing that happened on Thursday. One thing I want to float out there, but a general question. I'm more and more leaning towards identifying myself as Ilocano, a person of Ilocano descent who lives in the United States and was raised in the United States. There's many people in the Philippines, I know that I'm very conscious of the fact that the travel ban initially included the Philippines. Very conscious of that, and I'm very suspicious of when it may return or whoever might be added. And so the work that I'm focusing on, for 20 years I really focused on the United States war in the Philippines, and I was ranting on that. But now I'm in a place where I want to be more vulnerable, and I think about acquittal and how the beautiful, exquisite vulnerability that was shown, and in all the pieces, but I want to move towards more vulnerable places, so it's making me feel extremely vulnerable. And I'm wondering, in this time of Trump or in this time of contemporary history, the past couple of decades going backwards and going forwards, how do each of you take care of yourself? I feel genuine terror in researching. I'm kind of paranoid to begin with, but I'm also, thinking, man, I actually canceled a trip I was going to take to the Philippines, to the southern part of the Philippines, where there's currently, where it's been a long-standing Muslim community. Long-standing, I mean hundreds, centuries-long Muslim community in the southern part of the Philippines. And I canceled the trip because, there's massive shootings of random people pulled out of their houses going on now. And I'm just wondering about, how do each of you take care of yourself, whether it's with coalition building or if you approach a topic or a personal part of your work, or like something you're researching. How do you care for yourself, whether it's, like I said, coalition building? And I don't mean like, bubble bath. We don't take bubble baths, but like, how do you care for yourself intellectually, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, socially, as we continue to do this as we continue to belong to a continuum of revolutionary work? How do we do that? How do you do that?
So it feels like we might want to answer that question before we take a few more questions. Is that cool? Does anybody have something they want to say about that? How do we, because I think that's relevant to everyone in the room. How do we care for ourselves doing this work?
Yeah, I've always heard the stories of people being randomly selected at airports, and I say, I've been lucky, I've never had that happen to me.
Yeah.
All of that. But now, just in the last 3 months, I was given this SSSS on my boarding pass yesterday. In Frankfurt, I went for this randomly selected thing, and 3 months ago in the Dominican Republic, I just smiled through it, and so what? Because people are actually suffering a lot more than that. So if that's the best they can throw at us, let's just run through it and do what we have to do.
Other responses? Yeah.
I think when we check in with whatever impact we're having, that becomes really an integral part of, our own self-care. Because you can forget that very easily, and we get so caught up in the work and we get so overwhelmed that we oftentimes believe we're not having impact or we're not affecting these conversations and our communities. And when we give ourselves permission, if you will, to sort of check in with that, to recognize it's empowering and it's healing. And maybe it's odd that we do lose sight of that so often, but I think producing theater can sometimes be very lonely and very isolating, and all the work that goes into, in spite of the very collaborative nature of theater, and all the work that just goes into sustaining an organization. So those kinds of doubts can very easily set in and have a corrosive effect on.
Yeah, I'll say that I think there's an element to PTSD that is part of being who we are, and maybe even if we might say that's a too strong a word, it's not when I consider the violence you're talking about and the violence that's in everything I've ever worked on or researched. But at least if it's not that, it's burnout. So either way, and I think that one thing that's been coming up in the multiple inter-community discussions we've been having is how there are many different pockets of people doing work, and yes, they know each other. For the most part, not always. I mean, people were surprised to say, oh, I know this artist in Philly who's got her own Mix Fest going on while we're doing the Atlantic Mix Fest. It's like, okay, like we really do need to know each other. But the thing is, we might all be starting from zero and building up in each place. So I do think that there can be a way that we coalition build and communicate or something that builds on more. So we're not all starting from scratch each time. But the thing that's been on my mind, especially when it comes to conferences or festivals and these things, is I always want a retreat portion. It's never happened, but it's always what I want. Like, people always say, come, lead a workshop, come, speak, come, do your play, come. I'm like, it's all great, it's great, it's great. I'm like, can we do a pre-conference where we're all like getting our bubble bath? Our conference bubble bath. But we all have skills, right? And I can just imagine a pre-conference to any Middle Eastern festival, whatever we choose to do. We all gather the day before. Everybody's got their skills. Somebody's really good at yoga. Somebody's really good at movement. Somebody's great at voice. Somebody's great at writing exercises. Somebody's a perfect meditator. Whatever it is. Somebody's a good cook. And you just pre-conference together artistically. I'm like, that's all I ever want. And it's never part of the package. So I think it's quite easy. What I mean is it doesn't need extra money. It's space. And by the time you have space an extra day, I think nobody's paying people to do it. Everybody's bringing their own thing to the table because everybody wants it.
We have to wrap soon, but I know there were 2 people on the docket, and then I saw a new. Maybe that you were on the. Okay, so let's hear these 2 real quickly, and then we'll let the panelists wrap us up. Yeah.
Hi, I'll try and keep this short. Aya, she, her, hers. I kind of want to question and push back against Andrea's idea that things in music and the literary tradition are clear. Again, musicologist speaking, so I'm going to push back. But I mean, the idea that there aren't racialized bodies in music, or if I heard you incorrectly, please correct me. But I mean, like we wrestle with Said all the time in Orientalist music studies, and bodies are often implied through sound, and especially racialized bodies, and so 2 cents. Feel free to whatever.
No, thank you for that. That's great.
Thank you. And I want to lift up the normalization of identities and whiteness and stuff like that you were talking about, and how it's informed by all the different oppressions and historical forces and everything. And so my partner and I and a couple friends of mine were talking about genres and how, this kind of idea of a universal character or person who gets to be universal, and we were talking about who's the kind of character that you see. And so my problem with the predominantly white institutions, not just whiteness. And so we started coming up with all these different identity categories, and then putting the first letter of each of them
on like sticky notes and then trying to make like what would that genre be. And so we came up with a number of them, and we came up with white hearing, able-bodied, rich male from a metropolitan center, slender/muscled, from the United States, Protestant culture, English language, cisgendered, in your 20s and 30s, 40s. and we put the letters together and it formed Warm Suspect. Tiny percentage of the entire global population, and so we're actually representing like outside of that particular genre. So use it how you will.
I know. We are at time, but I just want to give the panelists like a final, very short word reflection, close out. Fawad, would you start us off, and we'll just come this way.
Well, I think we have our homework cut out for ourselves. I think lots of ideas have come out here, and we should be working on implementing those.
Thank you.
I want to just build on something that Danny had said, because he made reference to the Ottoman Empire. We've never healed, from that Ottoman history, and it creeps up all the time. So I want to also, recommend that we grapple with that as theater makers of many backgrounds.
I want to say that I really appreciate this conference and making space for us and the invitation to participate. Just going back to the question you asked about self-care, I would say that the last 2 years have been very difficult, and particularly as an Iranian living in the U.S. and the U.S.-Iran relations going to hell, and watching the effect of it on my family in Iran, it's been extremely difficult. And I'm an artistic director of a company. There are people that I care for, that I protect, and then there is like me kind of sometimes feeling really alone and vulnerable and unprotected. So connecting with my colleagues and connecting with other artists, having our monthly phone conversations, me and Jamil, those conversations and gatherings like this where they rejuvenate me and they make me feel hopeful and slightly empowered. Not empowered enough, I would say, but slightly empowered.
Oh yeah, and just kind of stemming off that, likewise, I think like probably most people in this space have felt kind of PTSD for the past couple of years, and I feel like every day I'm in a state of shock in some way. I think all the more because there was such a moment of
yes, hope.
We have turned the page, and it won't be turned back again, and then it was in several other pages as well. So I think the answer for care and moving forward is really just to keep writing for me and hoping that these companies produce. No. It has a life. But it really is just that act of courage and blind faith. I mean, there's a kind of religious quality to this, revolutionary quality to this gathering as well, and that's what writing is as well.
Yeah, I like the idea of pushing our boundaries and working together and just creating together. Back to that pre-retreat idea, the pre-conference ideas. Just getting in rooms where we can create together is exciting. We're going to learn so much from each other and all the other people in all those other communities that are 80% of the world's population. That's, do we even need a revolution? We're the majority. It's just over.
I just want to say, we really need to take the self-care piece seriously, because to a certain extent, surviving and thriving is also a revolutionary act. And we have to find the ways to make sure that we're healthy and able, we can't hold space for others if we can't hold ourselves, right? And so we've got to make sure we slow down sometimes to do that self-care work for ourselves and all of us. And I'm going to put my CAATA hat on for a second and say that I think CAATA, it's been a conversation throughout the morning in the activism session, and I think we're developing the like organizational muscle to be responsive, and I thank you for mentioning the theater in Gaza. And I want to say I'm interested as a board member in like figuring out how CAATA might want to speak out as a network, as a body, and on that and the travel ban and other things that are really impacting our communities and the work that we do. And just say thank you all for being here, being present, listening, and being in this movement with us and together. So, and thanks to our panelists. There are the announcements. I think we're announcements, Leslie?
I think we're good so far. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, everybody.